we have this assumption, at least in the 21st century, at least in Western English-speaking culture, that to be good is to be compromising. That compromise is the sort of fundamental virtue that opens the gate to all the other social graces. One should always be compromising. And that to be uncompromising, to be inflexible and principled, is instead a gateway to madness. Listen to this podcast. Listen to the whole podcast over several days going to the gym. Charlemagne the God and Andrew Schulz talking to Joe Rogan. I had never before listened to this guy's act at any length like this. Listened for several hours, this guy does. Within one and the same podcast, within the same 3-hour period, he puts forward the idea that he came to a moral crisis in his life, came to an ethical fork at the road. And when he came to this, Joe Rogan decided that either he had to become vegetarian or he had to take up hunting. So he had a feeling there was something deeply immoral about factory farming. And he was either going to challenge this by rejecting factory farming, by rejecting animal agriculture as it exists in the modern world, and becoming a vegetarian or vegan, or he was going to take up the practice of hunting and killing animals himself and resolve the ethical tension in his life in that way. Now, as you probably already know, he went ahead and did that. The curious thing is that within one and the same podcast, it happens to come up in conversation between the participants. The subject of what do they require in their rider. So the rider, this is a slang term for a contract, especially an entertainer's contract, where they sign a contract with the venue, and the venue they're performing at has to provide them with some set of services. So a lot of people like to joke around about this. One of the people in the conversation said that he just requires that they provide him with bottled water, but some people specify particular food or have particular outlandish things that want to be provided to them before they go on stage so that they'll feel comfortable. And what does Joe Rogan say? Meat. And his justification for why he wants meat provided was for the sake of his health, so that he doesn't eat junk food, as he put it. He wants, beef. He wants dead animals produced by factory farms. The same factory farms he challenged as unethical, that I've heard him say many times he rejects as immoral, the same factory farms that provided the rationale for him taking up this hobby of hunting. And he has sometimes suggested that he only or exclusively eats the meat that he kills with his own hands on these hunting expeditions, as opposed to the factory farms that he admits to be immoral. Now, evidently, what really happened here was he was looking for an excuse, any excuse, to rationalize his participation in the socially sanctioned system of economic exploitation of animals. And he found that, strangely enough, in going hunting himself, in taking on, the burden of debt more directly. He then felt less haunted by his indirect participation in these unseen evils of, raising animals in captivity, killing them, cutting up their bodies, and consuming them, and so on. I wish I could say it was bizarre, but I guess the truth is his perspective is dismally and depressingly normal. I was in an internet forum a couple days ago. I think everybody else in the room is way more left-wing than I am. I'm a kind of pragmatic, nihilistic, moderate person. And one of the people in this internet discussion forum was just saying, he was talking about a socialist manifesto, a particular book that, he feels is a great inspiration. He was saying, if only more people would read this book, then they'd understand and they'd support his particular political movement. And I said to him, rather than debating the merits of this particular book, could you just concede the point that any political movement, any social cause that requires the American people to read a book to appreciate it is doomed from the outset? If people got to read a book to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish and to sympathize with it and support it as a cause, your cause is going nowhere. I wasn't joking. It was funny, but I wasn't joking. Veganism is so simple. The rationale for it, ethically and ecologically, it's so simple that a child can apprehend it easily. And I think that grown-ups, people like Joe Rogan, they struggle against it, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. They feel it pulling them in like a force of gravity. It's very much what he described, that, he felt this ethical pull. He felt this, pressure on it to either accept the logic of vegetarianism, as he put it, and reject animal agriculture, or to challenge it. And he decided to challenge it by challenging himself to go out and hunt, go out and kill animals with his own hands. What I find strange and saddening about human nature is that most people have an excuse-making habit of mind, whereby an excuse for something is an excuse for anything, an excuse for everything. So what do I mean here? This is like the person who is on a diet and trying to lose weight, and then they eat one chocolate bar. And rather than just having a detached attitude saying, okay, I shouldn't have eaten that chocolate bar, but now I can compensate. I can, discipline myself more and keep my diet in order. Instead, eating the chocolate bar becomes a pretext to just give up on the diet entirely and eat a whole bunch of stuff. Eat a whole bunch of unhealthy food that's contrary to the diet they're trying to maintain. As long as there's one imperfection to provide a rationale for total self-indulgence, they just revert to total self-indulgence as their default mode of behavior, as if it takes this incredible ideological edifice. It has to be perfect and seamless, and there's just one hole poked in that edifice. Then what comes flooding through the hole is their intrinsic nature to be a completely self-indulgent scumbag. Just being honest with you. I never have met anyone who took seriously the kinds of excuses that I hear and I debate with people, who took seriously the excuse that they put forward that, okay, maybe some animals have these higher levels of cognition and higher levels of sensitivity and feeling, but, they argue against me, but what about the lowly sea cucumber? What about animals in the ocean that don't even have a brain? What about jellyfish? They're translucent. You can see right through them. They have some complex behaviors. They can tell the difference between light and darkness, and, they can avoid predators and hunt prey. But nevertheless, they have these kinds of doubts, or they drum up some kind of phony skepticism here. I've never once met or spoken to or even heard of a person who followed through on that logically, consistently, to then say, okay, they'll maintain a vegan diet, but they'll remain open to the possibility that they might one day eat a jellyfish on the grounds that jellyfish don't have brains. That they have in their mind some kind of dotted line, some kind of distinction where some animals count and they put some animals in the same category as vegetables because they think a sea cucumber is more like a real cucumber than it is like a slug. Or, I don't know, maybe they'd be willing to eat a slug too. I don't know where they draw the line. I have never once seen someone who reasons that way. Instead, they're like the person clinging to the fad diet. And then once they get that candy bar that breaks the diet, then the flood comes through. Then all of their resolve and self-discipline, all of the even the moral characteristics they espouse to themselves, just disappear, just washed away like it's nothing. I mean, Joe Rogan's mentality is not that hunting free-range wild animals can and should replace factory farming. He says that, but it's not what he really means. What he really means is, because he's had this experience of hunting wild animals, it frees him, it liberates him to live a life of totally aimless self-indulgence. And that is exactly what he's doing. Joe Rogan does eat cheese. He does eat dead animals that come from factory farms. He eats dead animals that come from a supermarket and a restaurant like McDonald's and all the rest of it. He does. I'm sorry, but based on hearing that one podcast, it's completely established that he is a liar and a hypocrite. But we live in an epoch when it has just been normalized. It's just become the predominant mode of human behavior to live a life of reckless, wanton, short-term self-indulgence. And where the primary purpose of human reason, of the higher faculties of the mind, the primary purpose your brain is put to is precisely making excuses for that life of self-indulgence so that you feel like a good person, or even so that you feel heroic. And when Joe Rogan is out there with his bow and arrow and with his dagger killing and cutting up an animal corpse in the wilderness, he feels like a hero. And that, in some strange sense, is psychological compensation for the feeling that started him on this journey in the first place, which was that he found out the brutal, disgusting, exploitative, ecologically irresponsible reality of animal agriculture, of factory farming. And he felt implicated as the villain.